For many years, France had a big army in Africa. French soldiers were stationed in various countries across the continent, maintaining a strong presence. This was because France used to control many African countries. These countries were once French colonies, and France had significant influence over their politics and economies. French soldiers were everywhere, reminding everyone of France's power. They conducted parades, interacted with locals, and were a common sight in many towns and cities. But things are changing. African countries are saying, "We're in charge now." They are asserting their independence and demanding more control over their own affairs. They want France's army to leave. Protests and rallies have become common, with people holding signs and chanting slogans for the French troops to go home. France isn't as powerful as it used to be. The French military is packing up, shipping out equipment, and closing down bases that have been there for decades. From busy cities to small towns, everyone is saying the same thing. We want to decide our own future. This isn't just talk, it's a movement gaining momentum across the continent. French soldiers are going home and their bases are closing. The once bustling military installations are now empty, a sign of the changing times. This is a big deal and could change everything in Africa. With the French military leaving, African countries have the opportunity to grow their economies and develop their infrastructure independently. African countries are taking charge and they want to control their own destiny. National celebrations and military parades now symbolize their newfound independence and strength. France's army isn't so important anymore. What will happen next? The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear: Africa is on a new path. Nobody knows, but Africa is changing and the world is watching. The continent is poised for a new era, and everyone is eager to see what comes next. France's army in Africa is deeply connected to its colonial past, a history that has left a lasting impact on the continent. A long time ago, during the era of colonialism, France took control of many African countries, establishing a vast empire. They exploited the local populations and imposed French culture, language, and systems, attempting to assimilate the people into French ways of life. Even after these countries gained independence in the mid-20th century, France maintained a significant military presence in the region. France claimed its military presence was to provide stability and support, but many believed it was a way to retain influence and control. French soldiers often intervened in local conflicts, supported political leaders favorable to French interests, and protected French economic investments. While France stated its intentions were to maintain peace, many Africans viewed this as a continuation of colonial dominance and interference. The painful history of colonialism is still fresh in the minds of many, and the presence of French soldiers often serves as a reminder of that suffering. Many Africans felt that France's true motives were to exploit the continent's rich resources and maintain geopolitical power. This perception has fueled widespread anger and resentment towards France, leading to protests and calls for the end of foreign influence in their countries. France says its army keeps Africa safe, but many Africans disagree. They argue that the presence of French troops often leads to more conflict and instability rather than peace and security. They say France makes things worse, supports bad leaders, and doesn't fix the real problems. Instead of addressing the root causes of issues like poverty and corruption, they believe France props up regimes that serve its interests. People want to be independent and run their own countries. They feel that true independence means having the freedom to make their own decisions without foreign interference. They are also angry because France still controls a lot of the money in its former colonies. This economic control is seen as a form of neo-colonialism, where former colonial powers still exert influence over their ex-colonies. They think France's army is there to protect its businesses, not the people. Many believe that the military presence is more about safeguarding French economic interests, such as resource extraction, rather than ensuring local security. The internet and social media also play a big part. These platforms have become powerful tools for mobilizing public opinion and organizing protests. People share news and organize protests online. Social media allows for rapid dissemination of information, making it easier to coordinate large-scale demonstrations. Stories about France, some true and some not, make people distrust France even more. Misinformation and sensational headlines can fuel anti-French sentiment, leading to a cycle of distrust and resentment. This makes it easier for countries to tell French soldiers to leave. As public opinion turns against the French presence, political leaders find it more feasible to demand the withdrawal of French troops. Big news! Chad, a country that used to be friends with France, told the French army to leave in December 2024. This was a huge shock to France and changed everything. Other countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger did the same thing. African countries want to be in charge of their own future. These countries are tired of being controlled by France. They know there are problems, like dangerous groups, but they don't want France's help anymore. They want real friendships with other countries based on respect. France's army is being told to leave many African countries, so it needs a new plan. Having lots of soldiers in big bases isn't working anymore. Now France wants to be more flexible. It's reducing its soldiers and creating smaller, faster teams that can respond to emergencies quickly. France claims it wants to train African soldiers to handle their own security. France says it is trying to work with other groups like charities and businesses to help solve problems like poverty and climate change. But will this new plan work? France needs to build trust, understand the complicated politics of Africa, and let African countries take the lead. If you found this video insightful, please subscribe, like, and share.